The New York Rangers, one of the NHL's original 6 franchises and last year's President Trophy winning hockey team. Each year, the Rangers have been right there with some of the top teams in the NHL, but somehow, someway, they continue to fall short of expectations, extending their 30-year-long cup drought. So what's the issue here? Well, while the Rangers do have supreme talent throughout their roster, there are some issues that have held this team and their core players back from delivering a championship. So today, let's talk New York Rangers and why they may be missing their window to win a Stanley Cup. To fully understand how the Rangers got into this position, we need to take a deep dive into their roster, picking apart all of the negatives and positives surrounding this team. So let's begin with their offense. Offensively, the Rangers have some of the league's most skillful players, but most of their superstars were not organically drafted or scouted by the organization. Bringing in 3 stars like Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, and Mika Zibanejad, the team managed to surround their better draft picks with skillful players, high-end power play specialists, and playmaking centers that would be the new faces of the franchise. Mika Zibanejad was considered at best a third-line center in Ottawa before being moved to New York, where he took a massive step in his development, becoming around an 80 to 90 point player every season. Vincent Trocheck, coming off a rather underwhelming performance with the Carolina Hurricanes, was brought in to improve the team's edge and center depth, exceeding all expectations that fans had for him over just a few seasons. Artemi Panarin, of course, was one of the biggest free agents back in 2019, and it wasn't a gamble to bring him in at the time. You just had to be willing to pay that steep price of $11 million a season to have him come join the team. And I don't think Rangers fans regret this decision at all, considering the fact that Artemi Panarin continues to get better each season, and this last year put up 120 points for a career high. Outside of their free agency moves and trades, the Rangers drafting hasn't been 100% perfect. I would say some of their picks have exceeded all expectations, like Chris Kreider and of course Igor Shesterkin, but others like Alexis Lafreniere, Kaapo Kakko, and Filip Chytil have left fans wanting more over the past couple of seasons, despite some of their development. In 2009, the Rangers drafted Chris Kreider with the 19th pick in the first round. Kreider today is one of the game's more underrated goal scorers, having size, speed, and his deflection ability is just off the charts. Alexis Lafreniere, the first overall pick back in 2020, each year has developed more and more, becoming a legitimate winger for the Rangers. But still, with all of the expectations of him coming into the draft and being a first overall pick, it does still leave fans wanting more, and hopefully his development can continue because he looks to be on the right track. Their other 2 draft picks in Kaapo Kakko and Filip Chytil just have been underwhelming. While both of these 2 players have had some solid years, with Chytil putting up 45 points in 2022-23 and Kaapo Kakko putting up around 40 points that same year, both had a bit of a dip this year. With Chytil being injured most of the year, we weren't really able to gauge how much he progressed over the offseason, and for Kaapo Kakko, it's just a disaster. 19 points in 61 games played, just unable to produce as a second overall pick. Their offense has talent, it has skill, and they have the makeup to actually be a legitimate team filled with depth, especially when you consider some of the other players that have just sort of fallen into this roster's hands, like Matt Rempe, who adds a bit more physicality and fan favoritism to this team. But still, the Rangers' offense in the postseason continues to be underwhelming. But why is that exactly happening? Now, it's no secret that playoff hockey is just a different beast, and the biggest issue for the production of this roster in the playoffs is how they fall off significantly compared to their regular season statistics. This postseason, the power play struggles were brutal for the Rangers, especially during their series against the Panthers, who throughout their playoff run killed a whopping 88% of their power play opportunities against them. Now, most of this number was actually boosted up because of the New York Rangers, who rarely scored a power play goal during that series. This prevented star players like Mika, Kreids, and Bread from scoring, and in fact, both Kreider and Zibanejad during that series had 0 points during 5v5 play and less than 5 points during the series altogether. No team is going to win if your best players can't score, which is why it's so important to be able to have a bunch of different areas of your game that you can rely on. For Mika Zibanejad and even Chris Kreider, when the power play opportunities started to dry up, their games went along with it, and that's why these 2 players have caught a lot of flack for the postseason. season. Mostly Mika Zibanejad though, because Chris Kreider did have his moments throughout the playoff runs, but if you take a look back at that Florida series, the special teams were the biggest issue for the Rangers offense as they went throughout each game. The craziest thing is that the New York Rangers management team understands that this team's success doesn't translate well into the playoffs, and that they rely way too much on their special teams and not enough on their 5v5 play. Because of this, the past 2 years, they've decided to make trades to try and boost their depth to allow that 5v5 play to thrive a little bit more. Back in 2022-23, they brought in Kane and Tarasenko, who both have a ton of playoff experience. But with Patrick Kane dealing with injuries, this entire experiment didn't work out, and the Rangers underperformed tremendously that year, losing to the New Jersey Devils in the first round. This last year, management replicated the exact same model, bringing in players at the deadline like Roslovic and Wenberg, and yes, they were able to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, which was a step forward from the previous year, but both times ended in failure because the core guys just weren't able to produce, and their 5v5 play was lacking in almost every area. So why does this all matter when we're talking about a window of opportunity for a team to win a Stanley Cup? Well, in my eyes, there's two very important factors when we're talking about a core group of guys for a hockey team, and that's their average age and their contracts, and how that's going to impact the team moving forward. So let's take a look at this offensive core, their average age and their contracts. Mika Zibanejad right now is 31 years old and will be signed till 2030-2031. Artemi Panarin is 32 years old and is signed till 2026-27. Chris Kreider is 33 years old and signed till 27-28. And last but not least, Vincent Trocheck is 31 years old, signed till 2029-2030. All of this is to say that their offensive core is in their prime, and while they still are able to produce at a high level, this window is going to be very limited because one, of contracts, and two, maybe just regression of players as they get older. And while they're still all going to be able to perform at least until their mid-30s like most other superstars in the league, eventually the drop-off will happen. And with the Rangers having a lot of uncertainty with some of their younger players, this is why I feel like their window is definitely a little bit more limited than what most fans probably assume. Now, while their offense is super skillful, they do have their issues, but I don't think that that's the only reason why the New York Rangers have sort of failed over the past couple of seasons. I think there's a couple other things about this roster that need to be addressed before the Rangers can actually be taken seriously as a cup contender. Now, defensively, there's a lot to like about this Rangers core, but there's also a few concerns that you need to pay attention to. Now, two guys that I love on their defense are Adam Fox and Keandre Miller. Both guys always produce, they're trustworthy as core pieces on the defense, and should be building blocks for the team moving forward. But outside of those two players, their defense does feel a little bit lackluster, and the one guy that seems to be taking the brunt of the blame is Jacob Trouba, who had a tough go in this year's playoff run. The Rangers captain has a very physical game, and sometimes this can be a value add to the team, but lately his defense has just been brutal and sets the team back at times. Trouba made several mistakes during the Rangers playoff run, including costly turnovers, dangerous hits, and of course he just takes way too many penalties while he's on the ice. Now, to be fair to Jacob Trouba, I believe he was dealing with a broken ankle during the regular season last year. I could have my years mixed up, but I'm pretty sure this injury definitely had an impact on his game and his defensive prowess throughout the postseason run as too. This is just something that I remember reading about, and I want to make sure that we set the facts straight before we just say that he's the biggest problem on their defense. But injury aside, I'm not the only one who noticed the lapses in Trouba's game. Management seems to feel the same way, considering they tried to shop him this offseason to the Detroit Red Wings, but were denied because of a no-move clause. Outside of Trouba, though, in other news for the Rangers defense, Ryan Lindgren did re-sign to a one-year deal, and while I do like his game and he's incredibly fun to watch and also super admirable the way that he approaches the game, I do think that his style of play is not going to age too well, so hopefully the Rangers don't offer up too much on a contract when he's up for it, because that one might haunt them down the line just based on how his play actually translates onto the ice. Overall, the Rangers needed to shake up their defensive core, and maybe they feel like the Adam Fox and Jacob Trouba injuries are to blame for their lapses, but I feel like their defensive mistakes are just way too out of hand at this point. And when you have an elite goaltender like Igor Shesterkin making up for a lot of those mistakes and still you're losing, this is becoming a bigger issue than I feel like management is actually seeing. This actually segues perfectly into the next part of this video and the roster for the Rangers, which is their goaltending. Easily the best part of this team is the tandem of Shesterkin and Quick. The Rangers have built a solid duo, with Quick being a veteran who's signing year to year, obviously just playing that backup role, and Shesterkin, who has just been one of the more elite goaltenders over the past 5 years. There is one thing that's very important about this goaltending tandem though, and that's the fact that Shesterkin is going to be up for what could be the biggest contract any goalie has signed in this league. If you're a Rangers fan, then something you should be watching closely is the negotiations between Swayman and Boston. If the Bruins somehow offer him that $10 million contract that he's been asking for, then Igor Shesterkin could potentially make $12 to $13 million by 8 years on his next contract if he decides to stay in New York. With this new contract, the Rangers will have to shed other pieces, and a lot of the previous players we talked about may no longer have a roster spot. But for Shesterkin, because he's been playing at such an elite level, he basically has all of the cards in his corner. And being the backbone of this team, the Rangers will have to pay him, because if they let him walk in free agency, this team is going to look vastly different than how they've looked in the past couple of playoff runs. So with all that being said, let's answer the question of this video. Is the window closing for the New York Rangers to win a Stanley Cup? With an aging offensive core, young players who have not played up to their potential yet, a defense who has a great top pair but questions with their depth, and an elite goaltending tandem on their final year of their team-friendly contracts, I would say the Rangers' best window to win a Stanley Cup would be this year and maybe, just maybe, the next. Negotiating a contract with Shesterkin is going to be a handful. If you choose to re-sign Artemi Panarin a few years down the line, that might also be problematic. And with an aging core and a limited amount of roster space, I just feel like the Rangers need to take advantage of this opportunity while they still can, before things start to get a little bit more rocky down the line when it comes to figuring out how to build this roster. It's going to be important for the Rangers to continue developing their 5-on-5 play, figuring out their defensive issues, as well as working on a contract with Igor Shesterkin, because once it gets to about 2 or 3 years down the line, this team is going to look vastly different than what you see today. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that the window of opportunity is closing for the New York Rangers? Or do you think that if they just restructure some of these contracts, move off a few pieces like Jacob Trouba and some of the other ones that haven't exactly worked out, that this team could be competitive for even years after they move on from this core? Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you guys in the next one.